I'm Bob Chenoweth, born in Omaha, born in Benson in 1923, and I'm the son of Harold Chenoweth. That's what I'm here for, because I am the son of Harold Chenoweth, restoring motion pictures made by this very unusual man. I have relived my life restoring them, literally relived my life, because I didn't choose to go in the motion picture business. I was born into the business. Started working with my father as soon as I was able to, and continued to work with him until I went in the service and eventually left Nebraska. I discovered the old film. I had been in the motion picture business in California. Didn't come back to his business. And I wasn't as good a producer as he was. I mean, he was very innovative. He also, I believe, was a great historian. He would have been a fine history professor.
Grande, Coronado next heard of the land of Quivira, far to the northeast, which was said to be far richer than any land yet seen. In 1541, after journeying for 77 days...
He loved the history of the Civil War. He was particularly good at that, but the films I've restored have taught me more of the history of Nebraska and the Midwest than I ever got in school, just seeing his work. He was always a one-man show. He and I didn't always get along. We were both one-man shows, but my memories are good. They are. I'm so happy to restore his work, and I can probably talk about it better than anybody. I'm the only living person who knows what that man did. My sister knows some. She and I reminisce a lot, but because she didn't work with him day in and day out like I did, she doesn't remember nearly so much. I lived through a remarkable period, particularly between 1928 roughly and 1932. Several things happened. The first thing that affected his business was the introduction of spring-wound cameras. The first was a Bell & Howell IMO handheld camera. It allowed him to stand on the running board of a car and shoot this car going down the road, which I have restored, hang out of an airplane, shoot pictures. No longer did he have to have a tripod and crank that camera. When I look at some of the old hand-cranked film, I frankly don't know how he did it. In the first place, he had to crank that darn tripod and the camera. I still have 5 of his original cameras. And as I restore the film and do a little research on the history of the cameras, I've learned that the first camera he had must have been a German ornament, which I have now. A hand-cranked wood box camera made in Germany in 1914. And he shot American troops going off to fight Germany in 1917, and I believe it has to be that camera.
1917 heard the tramp of marching feet in every city, hamlet, and town of America. Armies and the beat of marching feet was changing the tempo of industry. The young manpower of America was marching off to war in the belief that they were making the world safe for democracy and that this was the war to end all wars. A motion picture record was made of one of these parades as it marched down the main street of Lincoln, Nebraska's capital city. What would the soldier of 1917 and 18 have thought? Could he have foreseen another world war fought for the same principles only 25 years later? The Nebraska football team of 1918 marched with other organizations.
So he's shooting the American troops going off to fight the Germans with a German camera made only 3 years before that date. The more I discover, the more remarkable these things are. So the first thing that happened in that period that I'm talking about between 1928 and 1932 was that hand-wound camera. That freed him to really shoot motion pictures more freely. It was still 35 millimeter nitrate film, but handheld shots. Then the next thing to hit was sound. This one-man producer in Omaha could not continue producing just silent pictures. So he was always a family man. We would drive to California to learn and about sound and acquire equipment. And also at the same time, the Depression hit. So I don't know how he paid for that equipment, frankly, but he did. He had to get it. And he would buy some of the major essentials and get the basic information in Hollywood on these trips that we made at least once every 2 years, driving to Hollywood. He would buy the essentials, and then he actually had a lot of equipment made right here in Omaha in machine shops. And his sound amplifier was made here in Omaha by a man, Charlie Craig, who was a theater projectionist, a very talented man, and I believe he worked for Ballantine Company, which is still in existence. But so much of the mechanical equipment was actually designed and made here in the Omaha machine shops, and then put with synchronous motors, off-the-shelf motors, and the equipment that he purchased in Hollywood. Well, then, of course, the Depression hit, and but he was able to now make sound movies. He did a very innovative thing in the early 1930s, well, during all of the 1930s. He put out sponsored newsreels. We're used to commercials on television today, but he would make films that were about 10 minutes long, 12 minutes long, that would be shown in theaters. And they would deal with things of interest to the farmers and small town merchants, or small town residents. A lot of 4-H club activities, a lot of state fairs, a lot of what was then Big Six football, Nebraska football, Kansas, Iowa, because these films were circulated in theaters throughout the Midwest. And they were all sponsored by 3 or 4 sponsors generally. The earliest sponsor was Butternut Coffee.
The first half is over. The sponsors of these films, the manufacturers of Victor Flour, OK Wheat Flakes, and Butternut Coffee, hope you are enjoying these pictures. Let's remember them on our next trip to our grocery.
Other sponsors were Crete Mills, OK Whole Wheat Flakes, Gooch Mills. There would always be 3 or 4 sponsors. And the theaters would show these free of charge. I mean, they didn't have to pay. to show these sponsored newsreels, and the local farmers and villagers loved the nature of the thing, the subject matter. Then he would be paid, a record would be kept of every time it was shown, what theater and what date. And the sponsors would be billed accordingly. Kind of an early, innovative approach to...
Were the sponsors integrated into the
they're
10 minutes?
Beautifully done. I marvel at some of them because he would be, I'll give you an example. He would be interviewing an old Nebraska football player. I can't remember the man's name. And a newscaster from one of the radio stations. Radio was king then. He always incorporated a lot of radio. In fact, WW sponsors some of them. KFAB sponsors. They were, besides the flour companies and the butternut coffee. And they would be sitting at a table and reminiscing over the last Minnesota game, just to pick an example. And the waitress would come and bring the coffee, and they'd remark, "Boy, this is good coffee. What kind? It's butternut." You know, it was almost terrible the way they did it, but it was subtle. And you got to, when you saw a 4-H club baking contest at the Nebraska or Iowa State Fair, it was always very prominently Gooch Mill, butternut coffee, well, the 3 sponsors were there, and some of these girls, they were on camera, sound, and they were cute. I used to like to go work with my dad at the state fairs because those girls were good looking. And I was just, all I did was drag cable and load cameras, but I was there. So I considered that innovative, and it got us through the Depression. Sponsored newsreels. I have told people when I was in business in Hollywood about how we did that. They thought, my gosh, that was remarkable. You know, today we're used to sponsored television and innovative stuff, but that was early motion pictures. But that was an interesting period, and he got us through the Depression. I worked with him every step of the way. Every time those pictures were shot and recorded, I was there. I was either in the early days just loading cameras or dragging cable or mixing the developer and developing, tank and rack developing. Did you ever hear that?
Sure, his own film?
His own film. He developed his own film. He was a one-man show. I want to tell you, he sold it too.
How do you have it printed?
He, first of all, he bought a Bell & Howell contact printer. Did his own printing. Hey, I did it too. And later got 16 millimeter contact printers. And this was done in the basement of the house, or well, in the first house in Benson, in that separate farmhouse in back. And he had a printing room, a laboratory for developing film, a projection theater on the second floor of this old farmhouse. And it was a one-man show. But I left something out. Not only did he shoot it, edit it, develop it, record the sound, that man sold it. Before he ever made the film, he went out and sold the sponsors, one man. And then he would type the scripts. Now, you know, he used an Underwood typewriter and 2 fingers. And every letter he wrote, he didn't have a secretary. Every script he wrote was, and he was fast with that Underwood. He was faster on that than I am on my computer. So a remarkable man. But it was a one-man show. Then he'd take me most of the time. We'd go sign up the theaters all over the Midwest. Then we'd go down and put the darn prints, well, not darn prints, they were great prints, on the Burlington train. I remember going to that Burlington, I don't know why we went to the Burlington station. I remember that more than I do.
Went through the Midwest.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, we went to the places he needed to send it to. We always went to the Burlington station, and we'd put those steel case, the films were in steel cases then, and pretty good size, even though, you know, they were they were one-reelers, what were called one-reelers. And put them on the train and get them to the theaters.
Now, was that nitrate film?
Nitrate film, a big problem. Theater fires were dangerous things in those days. Being a projectionist was a dangerous job. I was just telling somebody a few minutes ago, we had difficulty preserving the film, storing the film. In the place in Benson, he actually he dug a cave, tried to store it there. Humidity got to it. That didn't work. I remember something that'll shock you. We stored that nitrate film in the old Gordon warehouse, which was just demolished 2 weeks ago behind my loft where the Swanson plant was demolished. That nitrate film was stored in the Gordon warehouse. Now, somebody had lit a match there a few years ago. You didn't have to knock it down with a ball, I'll tell you that. It would have gone in a minute. But preserving the nitrate film was almost a hopeless job. But he had the good sense to send it to Chicago, to Burton Holmes, which was a lab that he used in the early days, to have it reduced to 16 millimeter. Reduction printers were never, and 16 millimeter were then available. Mm-hmm. And 16 millimeter was a safety film. And that's what I've worked with. That's what I found, 16 millimeter film, which is now going bad. Some of it is almost beyond restoration. But I did digitize almost all of it before it went bad. And I was an early believer in digitized film. Now, before I digitized it, I started preserving this film right after I located it here in Omaha on 3/4 inch tape. Okay. It was the only thing that I could find that was a reasonable preservation media. That's all gone bad now. I had it even in cold storage in Hollywood, and it has all gone south. I worry about, is anything going to last? I happen to believe in digital, but DVDs aren't going to last. Tape doesn't last. It's still an unanswered question, and I go round and round with archivists about the best way to preserve this film. I had offices for 20 years in Hollywood in the same facility as UCLA archives are located, and I have had discussions and arguments for years about the best way to preserve. Well, when my father was still shooting on Kodachrome,
still good.
So good, thank God he shot on Croca. And professionals like me were poo-pooing that as amateur and shooting on Ektachrome. We were wrong. Ektachrome did not last. Kodachrome is still good.
Positive, negative didn't last either.
And, well, Technicolor lasted, black and white was good,
right.
And Kodachrome. Well, you know, my dad once again was right. He was a remarkable guy. You know, he didn't, I got a lot of side stories to tell. I could go on endlessly, Don. He didn't trust light meters. They came out, but he finally bought one. I think his first one was a General, I still got it. I can show it to you. General Electric light meter. And I swear, this one-of-a-kind man would shoot, he would set the diaphragm on the camera, and the only reason he'd pull out the light meter was to see if it was accurate. If the light meter was accurate. He knew his eye was. one of a kind, believe me. A lot of great stories, and a little hard to get along with for me, because we were two of a kind, I guess. But the more I remember, the more I admire him. And not many people. I did have great differences with him. In fact, I'll be honest, we weren't on the best speaking terms towards the end.
Now, when did he pass on?
You know, I should know, and I can't tell you. He moved to California and lived there for quite a while.
Oh, really? I didn't realize.
Yeah, he lived in Long Beach, and what, 57?
That's what I was thinking.
No, it was after that. No, it was after 1960. Wait a minute, 65. Yeah, it was well after, because I remember we moved to a new home at 65, and he would come out there. No, towards 1970s.
I was trying to place where he had that stuff stored here in Omaha in the early 60s, and it seems like it was up around Harney Street somewhere.
Well, I don't know because I wasn't here.
Okay.
I found it in my sister's basement. And he had just, when he moved to California, he had just literally dumped it there. And as I said earlier, my sister told me, you get it out of here and I'm going to take it to the dump. Boy, I looked at that, I saw what was in it, and I loaded my station wagon and took it all to California. And then I did the worst thing in the world. I stored it in my garage in my house. You know, I didn't even really get into restoring it right away. And then her house burned down. So the gods were with me. In fact, I think they still are. I run out of money, I get tremendous setbacks, and yet something up there is cheering me on. And I know it's my dad's. I would say, don't give it up, or it's probably my mother. Don't stop, Mom, don't stop. I can hear him yelling at me. You're on a roll, and it's kept me going at 85. Wow. 85 years of age, and I'm loving it. I love the restoration of film more than I did producing film.
Now, do you run it, when you digitize it, all the stuff that...
Yes. I go through it. For a long time, I had a bunch of flatbed editing equipment.
Yes,
And in
okay.
fact, I rented it out until digital Avids put me out of business almost overnight.
Right.
So I have a bunch of old flatbeds left over. In fact, I've had to take some to the dump. A couple $100,000 worth of equipment. But there's one simple old editing machine, made in America, 16 millimeter Showcron, that I can work with real fast, and I can go through this film, and if I'm careful, not scratch it. And categorize it, you know, log it, and then pick what I want to digitize. Well, one of the good things about me going into the business in Hollywood and that area, was that I made a lot of good contacts. So I was able to get some pretty good deals on digitizing and restoring sound. I've found a lot of tracks that were bad, but nobody knows who Harold Chenoweth is. And unfortunately, that's true. You knew who he was, but most people don't.
I was in the business, probably.
Yeah. And he left here, and his friends have all passed away. Anyone who did know how great he was is gone. He didn't know that this film existed, and they went wild, as most people do, who've never seen it. When they see it, they just flip out.
Right.
Because they don't know it exists. I already told you that Butternut Coffee was my father's first sponsor. Before sound. Back in, I've got a Exarban parade, night parade, with a Butternut Coffee float in it. The first sponsored films all had butternut coffee as sponsors. I personally knew Paul Gallagher and liked him, the whole family. And my father always managed to make personal friends out of his clients. Tom Prettyman was the guy who blended their coffee. He was a close personal family friend.
Thank you very much.